U.S. history. What's up, guys? Long time no see. We are officially on the last day of week 5 of online learning. And for some of y'all, this is going to be your last day of new materials. So if you're one of those people, then congratulations. If you're not, then stick with me and we'll get us through the end of the year. So I wanted to start out with the webcam on, so I could tell you guys what a pleasure it's been to teach you and how great it was to have you guys in my class. And B, and most importantly, I mean, are you kidding? Tell me that's not the greatest mustache since Burt Reynolds. You could tell me that, but you'd be lying. So, again, guys, it's really been a pleasure. And if this is the last time that I address you before the summer, I hope you have an awesome summer break, and that everybody stays safe. And you guys are seniors, so I actually hope I don't see you next semester. No, you're not. My bad, guys. Yeah, you are actually. So, anyway, let's finish the year strong and um, let's finish on a bright note. Unfortunately, for those of you guys that are leaving us on Friday, there's a lot of there's a full really 3 decades, 2 decades that we have left to cover. So there are a few notable historical moments, a lot actually, of important historical moments that we haven't talked about in class. So I'm sorry you guys are missing those, but I encourage you to look up the Iraq War, September 11th attacks, uh, the election of our first black president, Barack Obama, etc. So anyway, if you're leaving us on Friday, so long, guys. I wish you nothing but the best of luck at whatever your next stop is. So, you guys have officially had a chance to admire the stash. I'm still getting a pretty good shine off the old forehead there for old time's sake. I'm going to X out and let's get going. So, we've already talked about him in the context of how he defeated Carter in the election, won a landslide victory, and we talked about the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. Um, but I want to go through and let's just highlight some additional key points. So Ronald Reagan is a conservative Republican. He is by most Republicans still considered an icon of Republican values. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I see kids y'all's age wearing Ronald Reagan T-shirts. Most of them don't even know who he is, but they do know that Reagan, the name Reagan, is synonymous with Republican values. So definitely a cult figure among the right, and certainly one of our most, not to use this word too often, one of our most iconic presidents. So he's able to bring together. If Carter was elected by bringing together this second New Deal or this New Deal coalition, Reagan won by putting together a New Right coalition, combining economic conservatives, right? So people who have conservative views when it comes to the economy, with members of the Christian right, working class whites, and supporters of a more aggressive Cold War policy. Um, Economic conservatives tend to vote Republican anyway, as do right wing Christians. Working class whites, though, although Republicans nowadays have a really good thing going when it comes to support among working class whites, up until the 80s, uh, a lot of working class whites, the majority, supported Democratic candidates. However, once Reagan does an excellent job of packaging together a platform that appealed to those working class whites who had just gone through the Carter presidency. The economy was in the tank. So he was able to bring them in alongside the more hawkish Cold War people, the ones who wanted a more aggressive policy, Christians and conservatives. He is known for engineering large tax cuts, but the deficits grew. So he's a two-term president, born in Illinois, went to Eureka College. If I recall, I believe he was a football player. He was a Hollywood actor and a six-term head of the Screen Actors Guild before taking up a job as a spokesperson for General Electric Corporation. I would be remiss if I did not show you this. Bedtime for Bonzo was a film that Lincoln made, or excuse me, that Reagan made. And my mom, when it was bedtime, that's what she always said, bedtime for Bonzo. So there you go. He was able to parlay this into the presidency. First, the governorship of California, and then the president. So let's get back to the matter at hand. He started out as a liberal Democrat, but then he became a big advocate of the free market economy. He became what he called, or what was referred to as, a free market political conservative. In '62, he formally changes his registration from Democrat to Republican. He was definitely not a fan of expanded government. He was a big believer in small central government. Reagan promised to cut taxes, increase defense spending, promote deregulation, and balance the federal budget. Tax cuts, defense spending, deregulation, those are all stalwarts of Republican policy. I'm not sure if I'm using that word right, stalwart, but those are all things that conservatives tend to value. He also promised to combat inflation. Remember, inflation under Carter, largely as the result of the oil crisis in the Middle East, inflation was very, very bad. Trayvon, if you're listening to this, buddy, in the words of Grandmaster Flash, you got a bum education, double digit inflation. Can't take the train to the store because there's a strike at the station. That's referring to that came out in like 1977 during Carter's presidency. So there you go. He remember Carter's big selling point. He promised he would never lie to the American people. And as far as I know, he did a good job of holding to that. Reagan markets himself as a spiritual man, a man who values Christian morality. And he calls for a return to spiritual values. Wanted an amendment to ban abortion and another amendment to permit organized prayer in schools. Abortion was, is, likely always will be. Banning abortion is a major cause for conservative Republicans. Some on the Republican side feel like there should be specific situations, but as a general rule, opposing abortion is, that sort of comes with the territory of being a Republican president. They called him the Great Communicator for his plain spoken, self effacing, and humorous manner of speaking in public. Self effacing means like kind of making fun of himself. And he put off a vibe of being very optimistic, being very upbeat, very optimistic. And you can see that in his inaugural address and in his television commercial, his famous commercial in 1984, Morning in America. In fact, I do miss teaching you guys, but um, it's nice to have the entire internet at your fingertips while you talk to your students. I love campaign ads, especially historical campaign ads, I should say. New ones get kind of old, but
it's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
how about that? It certainly paints a nice image of what was going on in 1984, and that was a prosperous time in the United States. And he's able to ride that momentum into an easy victory. By the way, Reagan's vice president was George Bush, George H.W. Bush. Of course, George H.W. Bush would go on to be president for one term, and then his son, George W. Bush, was a two-term president in the early 2000s. So, anyway, his economic policy is known as supply side economics. He's so synonymous with supply side that they actually call it Reaganomics. Basically saying he wanted to cut taxes, deregulate some industries, hoping that it's sometimes called trickle down. In other words, thinking that as the rich people, corporations, wealthy individuals get more money from these tax breaks, that they will invest that money to create jobs and spur economic growth. In his first year in office, he engineered a three-stage 25% income tax reduction. That's large. It was hoping that it would lower cost and boost profits while for employers while lowering prices for consumers. And Initially, it is approval. We showed this. I showed this clip in or this quote in my government class and asked, based off of this quote, do you think Reagan was conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat? He says often that government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. And most memorably quipped, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So he spoke out in no uncertain terms against large government. In reality, he wasn't quite as extreme in his conservatism as he made himself out to be, as he marketed himself to be. But still, I mean, definitely a conservative guy. But some things he more or less left untouched. Reagan, we were just talking in world history about Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister in England during Reagan's tenure as president. And when I was discussing her, I got this information from Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a great source, by the way, if you ever have to write a paper, which you will. But these are the same things that she did. He cut social welfare programs, cut spending on food stamps, cut spending on low income housing or project housing, and school lunch programs. Okay? Cut social welfare programs, food stamps, project houses, school lunch. Those are things that I personally think are pretty important, but they were not the focus of his party or his presidency. He didn't place a lot of importance on those. Reagan was a staunch anti-communist. Staunch just means like firm, a firm anti-communist. So he painted the USSR as an evil villain, and that was good for him because it gave the American people it gave them an enemy. And I'm not suggesting that they were our friend, but it allowed Lincoln to sort of take up cause as our leaders against an evil empire. In fact, going back to, let's watch a clip right here. This is his famous evil empire speech. This doesn't load up here for us in just a second. I'll X out. Well, it helps when you have sound. We're just gonna forget about that. We've got facts to cover. He made good on his promise to build up the military. Got new missiles and bombers, developed a space-based strategic defense initiative that they called Star Wars, which of course was a very popular movie. The idea was they wanted the ability to shoot down Soviet missiles. Um, President Reagan's administration funded what they dubbed freedom fighters, basically people rebelling against communist nations. So, rebels in Angola, um, rebels in Nicaragua, and gave aid to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. The sad thing is, some of these guns that went to Afghanistan wound up shooting at American soldiers years later. We invaded Grenada and we helped them get their Marxist leader out of power, put in a new leader. Now, when a world power like the United States essentially helps appoint a new government leader after a coup or after they overthrow the government, that leader, in this case, is going to do what Reagan wants him to do. We call that a puppet regime. In other words, he's got boss, on his door. Did the guy in uh, Grenada, but really Reagan was telling him what to do. He was involved. We were involved throughout um, Central America, South America. Like we talked about yesterday, Mikhail Gorbachev, compared to Russia's prior leaders, was pretty open to change. He was a reform minded leader. Uh-oh. So his openness to change allowed the U.S. and the Soviet Union to start to come back together, start to kind of ease the tensions. Reagan and Gorbachev met quite a few times. They met 4 times. And one thing they did that was a very big deal because we had been in an arms race with Russia, the Soviet Union, for decades, is they agreed to a nuclear arms reduction treaty. They also started negotiating that led to other arms reduction talks, including the one in the 90s start that drastically reduced our nuclear arsenals, both us and Soviets. We watched this. We watched a clip of this yesterday. Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall as the Soviets, cheer him wildly. Of course, the wall did come down. I think we've got a few more slides, but in parting today, I'm going to show you maybe the greatest historical moment we've studied all year, and that's when David Hasselhoff sang "On Top of the Berlin Wall" the night it went down. So uh, look forward to that. In the Middle East and North Africa, um, the United States was also facing threats, specifically the rise of terrorism. One thing that really sullied Carter's administration was that he was unable to get the hostages back from Iran. Nixon takes office, and that day they released them. So, like, right off the bat, he hits the ground with a major triumph. We start seeing the use of suicide bombs throughout that area. But when a suicide bomb killed 242 Marines who were there to support the Lebanese government, Reagan took the Marines out. We fought a lot with Libya throughout that era. Shot down their fighter planes in what was known as the Gulf of Sidra incident. There was a bombing at a club in Germany that killed American soldiers. So Reagan authorized the bombing of certain targets in Libya. Reagan was known for making very powerful speeches, especially when it came to national security. He gave an address to the nation where he said, when our citizens are attacked or abused anywhere in the world on the direct orders of hostile regimes, we will respond so long as I'm in this office. The Iran-Contra affair, I don't know if you guys have ever heard that term, but that really put a black mark on the second term for Reagan. Basically, the U.S. officials sold weapons to Iran, and they took the money from the Iranian weapons sales to fund Nicaraguan rebels rebelling against Marxist government in Nicaragua. These Nicaraguan rebels, they're known as the Contras. So you have the Contras and the Sandinistas. Here's the catch. Both selling those arms to Iran and giving aid to the Contras was illegal. And a man named Colonel Oliver North and a few others were eventually dismissed and charged with breaking the law. Now, Reagan was never directly linked to this in terms of, well, let me rephrase that. If he didn't give the orders, he certainly gave the okay. There was a weapons for hostage exchange where the U.S. sold anti-tank missiles to Iran. And as a result, Iran worked to get some American hostages released. Then they took that to support the Contras. So he had vowed that his administration would never negotiate with hostage takers. But if you're giving missiles in return for hostages, I would say that's negotiated. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but my neighbor upstairs is learning to play the bass guitar, and it's pretty terrible. So by late 1986, the U.S. Attorney General announced that between 10 and 30 million received from Iran in the missiles for hostages deal was taken and given to the Contras. Later on, it would be found out that they gave more than $70 million. We're running out of time. Perfect. So that's our last slide. So, although it's certain that Reagan condoned the sale of missiles for hostages in Iran, there's no evidence he knew Oliver North was diverting money from the missile sales to the Nicaraguan Contras. Basically, Oliver North took the fall. Some people blamed Reagan's hands-off administration style as one reason this happened. So Reagan was a big picture guy, but he delegated a lot of the other responsibilities. The problem with that is it resulted in stuff like this. They also called him the Teflon president because he just seemed Teflon is a surface that stuff doesn't stick to. He was able to keep his reputation as a good guy by a lot of people, despite these things. So, as promised, I'm going to send you off in style with a little bit of the Hoff. And guys, again, it's been a real pleasure. Nobody wants to answer questions. So long, class.
Freedom I have none. I've been looking for freedom. I've been looking so long. I've been looking for freedom.
Guys, if that doesn't make you proud to be an American, I don't know what will. Have a wonderful summer.